so much. I don't know if you were going to thank me for being here, because actually for the first time in about 20 months I've got a cold. So I've been sniffling away here. So it's funny coming up on the train, because I sort of like sneeze, and then the people around would look at me like I'm a terrorist. All I'm doing is sneezing because I've got a cold. But the thing is, I didn't take a test, so I could be here tonight. I'm never going to take a test or anything like that. The best tweet I've seen in the last 18 months was by Ian Brown. You know, he said, no test, no track, no trace, no mask, no vax. I think that's brilliant. And that's what I do to fight the COVID regime. And I know some of you do as well, which is wonderful. But on that point, it's just so bizarre, I think, how people have been programmed in order to act and think and speak in a different way. And, you know, for most of my life, I've just been minding my own business, taking everything at face value and just thinking, well, you know, if people say something, then they mean what they say and so on. But I've started to notice in politics, particularly getting into politics, which I've been actively involved in since 2015, people don't always say what they think and what they mean. People sometimes try to deceive you. And they also try to make up ways of speaking, which I find quite disturbing. And when I was on the London Assembly, I first got to hear about something that TfL has. And TfL stands for Transport for London. And of course, that's one of the things that the Mayor of London is in control of. And when I was there, I heard of something called a Behavioural Insights Unit. And what they do is they try to work out how to get people to behave in certain ways and act in a certain manner without them realising that they're even doing it. So they're trying to plug into your subconscious and unconscious mind in order to change your behaviour. Now this was just TfL, I'll move on from this in a minute. But one of the things I noticed, that you might have noticed as well, a couple of years ago, if you walk to London Bridge Station, and you walk up the escalators onto the platforms, they're platforms, what's it, 1 to 9 or something. A couple of years ago, there appeared this huge, angry yellow box, and it said, "No waiting," in big capital letters. And the effect of that was, I suppose, to try to encourage people not to wait at the top of the escalators because they had a problem with that. But I just noticed it was very, very striking when it first happened that someone had decided, in order to try to get people not to do that, they would make a huge angry yellow letters and paint them on the floor all over the platform. And that's just one example of what these behavioural insights people do. But of course we all know with the COVID situation, behind the mainstream media, which is always trying to manipulate our minds and everything using neuro-linguistic programming and language and so on, then you've got the government, and behind them lies SAGE, and many of the people on SAGE are behavioural psychologists. And there's all these new, there's almost a whole new vocabulary that has grown up. And sometimes it's very, very difficult to counter that vocabulary, rebut that vocabulary in a way that will not let them come back and attack you very, very quickly and easily. And that's what they do. So we often have a battle of words in debating and in politics, but this has gone beyond politics into the media and into wider society. And one of the key phrases I find that I hear people using all the time, and Sadiq Khan used to do this because he was a big propagandist and promoter of the vaccines, which I don't call vaccines, but more of that later. But he would say they are safe and effective. And I completely disagree with that. And I actually asked him one time in the London Assembly, look, Mr. Mayor, you said these vaccines are safe and effective, but how can you say they're safe when there's not been any long-term testing done because they've only been invented a few months ago? And how do you know the long-term effects, particularly on pregnant women and women of childbearing age? And he kind of launched into some pre-prepared answer and ended up saying, we need to listen to experts, not conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers, which are two other phrases that get thrown out at me and people like us maybe all of the time. And I'm thinking, how do you counter these? Because you need to counter these phrases because they're very powerful phrases. When someone accuses you of being an anti-vaxxer, like, I don't mind myself. It just, it's like water off a duck's back to me. But it does affect millions and millions of other people around who we need to bring over to our side, and they are also affected by this, and they don't want to be called an anti-vaxxer because they're scared of being labelled as something which the media, the government, the behavioural psychologists will try to paint you as someone who's crazy and not worth talking to and whose opinion is worth nothing if they're labelled as an anti-vaxxer. So I was trying to think about how I would do this, and the first thing, of course, is that I never refer to these experimental injections as vaccines. I always call them experimental or injections of experimental mRNA in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna virus, or a genetically modified chimpanzee adenovirus in the case of the AstraZeneca one. And I seem to get away with this on social media because they're always looking for anyone who says vaccine, and you often get a ban or something, or you get kicked off these social media platforms if you say anything about vaccines. But I seem to get away with actually saying what on earth I like about experimental injections. So you look at my Twitter feed, it's a bit spicy, but there you go, you can, and that's a good way around it. Now, I would say that I am not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not against the scientific principle of a vaccine, which is that when someone is exposed to a weakened or deadened or attenuated pathogen, it trains your immune system to recognise a stronger pathogen when you come into contact with it. And as I was a science teacher, I used to teach kids all about Edward Jenner and the story of him inoculating a small boy against smallpox with cowpox. But that was a pure, weaker version. Cowpox is a weaker version of smallpox, effectively. But that was a pure pathogen, which was weaker, but it wasn't mixed with all of the other gunk that you get in the syringes that gets injected into you. So I think there are, to counter these phrases, you need to really speak quite intelligently. And if you speak scientifically, then the sort of media interviewers won't actually know how to come back at you. And because I've got a science background, I haven't actually been invited onto any mainstream media platforms to talk about it. I wonder why they don't want me on. I think, I'd sort of have them for breakfast, and I'd like to go on sometime and talk to some of these, Dr. Hillary or whatever. Dr. Hillary, if you're watching, let's go, you and me, let's debate. Piers Morgan, who said that anti-vaxxers are spineless, or something, well, I don't want to say the word, but it's something like a cat. But he said, yeah, so we're like spine. Well, I want to be polite here because the cameras are rolling, but we're spineless basically. So Piers Morgan, let's go, let's debate all about about vaccines from a scientific point of view, and the fact that these COVID injections that we're getting are not actually vaccines, they're experimental mRNA. But there's also other things that we need to question as well, which I think are legitimate questions that we should be able to ask and hypothesize scientifically without being cancelled and shut down and thrown out of debates. And that is, are these experimental injections of mRNA and chimpanzee adenovirus causative to the serious adverse health effects that we're seeing, the myocarditis, the pericarditis, the blood clots, the strokes, the sudden deaths, the Bell's palsy, the Guillain-Barré syndrome? Are they causative? We need to ask this question. And simply asking a scientific question like that does not make you an anti-vaxxer, it makes you a scientist. So, and then stop smearing people who simply ask, come up with hypotheses and ask about these things. Another question that we need to ask, and I would never have considered asking this before a year and a half ago, because I never even questioned vaccines at all. But another question we have to ask is, are the adjuvants and the chemicals in the syringes that go along with the vaccine, such as aluminium salts, mercury salts, emulsifiers, preservatives, and tissue from cell lines from aborted unborn children, are they having a detrimental effect on people's health if they get injected with them? That's a reasonable question to ask. I don't think it's wrong to ask that, and it's not something that I've heard anybody really ask, because there are so many other things in these syringes. We don't even know the contents, the full contents of the injections, the COVID experimental injections that we're getting. If you try to take a vial and analyse it, it's almost like you're trying to rob Fort Knox. They don't want anyone to actually get one so they can analyse them themselves. But I think some people are starting to do that now, and some of the reports I've heard are not particularly good about what actually might be in them. So those are the things that I think we should ask, particularly as they are running down through the age ranges, and we know this is happening because, first of all, last year it was 15 million jabs to freedom, wasn't it? Just jab the elderly. I don't know why they're picking on the elderly, but they would jab the elderly and the vulnerable, and then we could be free. But then it was not 15 million, then it was everyone over 50, then over 40, then over 21, then over 18, 16. Now they're coming for our kids. And in America, you've got Dr. Fauci wanting to jab 5 to 11-year-olds, and then you've got some places even talking about jabbing toddlers with these things, which are clearly experimental, and we do not know their long-term safety effects. So we've got to speak out about this and actually say, no, you're not going to inject our kids with these things because we don't know what's in them.
Yay.
And when the media does a hatchet job on all the people who are heroes, in my view, and freedom fighters standing outside schools and so on, trying to warn children, or just simply say to them, make sure you have informed consent before you take them. That's not too much to ask, is it? If you want to have them, fine, go ahead and have them. I wouldn't recommend it, but if that's what you want to do, take them. But if you shouldn't be coerced into doing it, and I think it's absolutely appalling that I've heard in some schools people are being made to feel like they're second-class citizens if they don't take a jab, and in some places they're now being given yellow stickers to put on them, which I think is absolutely appalling. People don't really have much memory of history there. But this is going on around the world. The other thing is, the other phrase that people use and throw at us is conspiracy theorist. Well, there's the old joke, well it's not an old joke now, it's probably a new joke, is what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact? Well, it's about 6 months. You know that one, because, you know, I was speaking out and Neil and many other people were speaking last year and saying, look, these vaccine passports are coming. And some people would say, no, that's just a conspiracy theory, that's not going to happen here. And it's happening, and it's happening all around the world. And after that, people were saying, well, there's going to be quarantine camps and so on to put people who are unvaccinated in. And that's ridiculous, that's a crazy conspiracy theorist. They built huge ones all over Australia. And I don't know if they've built them here in this country, I don't think so. Well, there's Wellingborough. I don't know if that's just a normal prison extension or not, I don't know. But we'll see what happens with that. But in other countries they are building them as well. So this is conspiracy theory to actual fact is going on. We know what the plan is, and we've got to wake up people to not get this digital identity. And I caused a bit of a stir today by saying on social media that I declined an invitation to speak at a conference next month where entry was only with the NHS COVID pass. And at the moment, you see, they're not making the injections mandatory for everybody in England, unless you're unfortunate enough to be a care home worker, in which case you've been thrown out of your jobs if you don't have a vaccine, or yeah, they're going to do it to NHS staff later on. But what they are trying to do is just get people used to the digital identity system, which is the NHS COVID pass. And you're finding it, they're using it in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland now to get into sports venues and large venues, but it's also creeping in England as well, with businesses just doing it of their own volition, even though it's not required by law in England that you have to do it. But I absolutely point blank refuse to speak at any venue which requires people to have an NHS COVID pass. I won't do it myself, and I won't ask people to do it to come and listen to me. I think that's absolutely wrong. So that's something about the just political debate. Of course, Chris mentioned there I'm the leader of the Heritage Party, so I'm trying to make a difference with the Heritage Party in the political sphere, because I think all the old parties are complicit with the COVID regime, the globalist regime, the World Economic Forum, whatever you call it. And so I'm standing myself in the by-election next week in Old Bexley and Sidcup. So I'm hoping this would be amazing, wouldn't it? If we wake up on Friday morning and I'm an MP. That would be so fantastic. I'd love to do that. I sort them out, I'll tell you. So the election's on Thursday. I'm hoping for a good result. We're doing everything we can to get a good result there. And we've also got a great candidate, James Elliott, standing in the North Shropshire by-election as well. So we're continuing to build, because I think we need an alternative politically. So we're trying to work within the system we've got. I know some people are trying to create new systems, which I think is great, but we also need to try to work within the system we have, because that's what we have at the moment, and we've got to try to break into that with a new party. It's tough in this country with the first past the post system, but we've got to go for it. If you don't try, you won't succeed, and I'm very much hoping that we will succeed and we'll be able to get a bridgehead into Parliament, and then we'll be able to start agitating to get some of these terrible laws removed and restore our fundamental freedoms and make sure this situation never ever happens again.